Okay.
You mentioned linking the IP repository into the bug tracking system. I'm curious, nobody mentioned the design specification or other documentation that goes with the design. Is that typically put in the same repository as the IP itself, or how do you keep that coordinated?
One of the things that we do is we have it parallel. We'll have like a different library type, which we call documentation, and all the engineers can go in there and just put in all the documentation for that. That gets tagged along with the design data, so that can go together as a unit. One of the things that we're also adding at a finer level to kind of do filtering is we're taking advantage of properties within IC Manage, so that allows us to kind of tag different IP blocks, for example, as functionality or technology, things like that, so that we can actually filter them or even gate designs. For example, we've had some issues in the past where we're RF group and we're very picky about how the pads are. If the ESD team goes and they puts a lot of diodes to protect ESD diodes to protect things, they're doing a good job to make sure the chip passes ESD, but then that'll kill our RF performance. So we just say, well, there's no point in passing ESD if the chip doesn't work. So we just rip it all out, and then we have ESD issues, and we start pointing fingers at each other. So by using properties in IC Manage, we'll say, okay, here, you guys have to check this box here. We check this box here. Everyone knows what everyone's doing, and if it blows up, we can kind of know how to triage that later on. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do with the documentation end.
So at NVIDIA, we store the documentation in the tool as well. So it goes into the same source code repository as everything else.
Second question was, somebody on the panel talked about integrating coverage with database data management. Can you expand a little bit more on that?
So I put that in my slides. It's probably more of the best practices to do that sort of thing. Essentially, IP, as it's being developed, it goes through multiple phases of maturity. As a management organization, you really want to make sure that you've got the finalized IP that has hit whatever criteria you have for test coverage or various types of sanity or design checks. Having a mechanism to see that in a correlation to a design database is also a good piece of high-level management data.
Question.
So you identified some best practices. The real challenge, I think, is how do you get the engineering community from your analog guy to your RTL guy to your coder to actually adopt and use those practices? And what have you found in your companies that you make that, enable that? What were the techniques you used to drive that?
Talk softly, carry the next step.
You're basically going to have to get management to be aligned with that practice. I mean, if your engineering VPs and senior VPs and executive VPs don't believe that their IP is worth anything and to keep it in a data management solution, you're hosed. I mean, it's not going to happen, right? I mean, you need to get everyone to agree that that's the thing. It can't be left up to engineer X or engineer Y who says, I don't need that, right? It needs to be, an edict throughout the organization that you're going to do that. I mean, otherwise you can't get it to happen. I don't think.
I think some of the things that I've done is I'll have like that story I told about the band gap. So it's a really simple and concrete example that everyone can understand. Here you have this small block of IP. It's critical for the entire chip, not just like the radio. And you can easily see how it could go through multi-stages of verification and be cleaned at every step of the way. And all of a sudden, once you're in production, it blows up on you. And just that fear of having to deal with that whole process of tracing it back and catching that at ATE, I think it creates a real need and effect on engineers. And that gets them to kind of stop copying and understand why we're putting in these rules.
A lot of IP is now designed at different companies. So there's a cross-organization, cross-company flow. And a lot of people have been saying you need this branching, you need visibility of versions, you need visibility of bugs, you need a dynamic relationship with your IP provider. How do you manage that in this business model that's going between different companies, and how do you get the IP provider to have the incentive to tell you how many versions they add, and what the bugs are, and make sure that you get the latest test cases fixed?
Okay, which one of you has had some experience and might want to address this?
I can try. So It's an interesting relationship when you try to purchase IP from a third-party vendor. Most third-party vendors are very reluctant to show you much of the content. You'll typically just get GDS, left, timing views, Verilog, and that's pretty much it. So trying to get them to disclose, probably you'll need some sort of contractual arrangement to be able to get them to disclose more than that, right? You will also have the problem of the probability that their internal design management system, whatever it be, is probably different than yours. So that's one of the challenges of purchasing third-party IPs.
So do we need standards for communication between the different management systems to allow that, since some people won't move?
Yeah, it's not clear to me that standards is the right answer. I think a free flow of information, is the key. And, different people have different, notions of what that visibility is. For example, people who are doing hard macros, they don't want you to know anything about it because, you're going to figure out, through their development cycle what happened. But I think there was a point, I think Gary made that last year during his presentation, that only 7% of IP is actually purchased from external vendors, right? You've got Synopsys, you've got ARM, and then you've got all, the cottage industry. But the majority is, internal reuse, right, Gary?
Yeah, most of it is internal, and now that we're moving up to this platform-based model, the requirements are that you hand off a complete verification test bench and verification. One of the issues that has not been resolved is, does that mean do I hand over the bug history, so that has not been worked out yet. But the issue is that, hey guys, you either do it or you're not in the business. We don't care anymore. We have to. We're buying large blocks. I mean, these things are, as I say, some of them come out to 50 million gate blocks, and we have to know how to verify those things because verification is such a big cost. So. The business model is changing dramatically, but what you're seeing now is most of the stuff, as Broadcom says, they do it in-house. They don't even fool with third party.
We have no problem tracking hard IP, from creation, GDS to tape-out. Our problem is with soft IP and how we retain the watermark or the tag on the RTL side all the way through GDS. Have you guys found a way of doing that or a solution to that?
I don't know, they're all looking at each other.
We don't have a lot of external IP, so it's not really a problem to worry about.
Well, internal as well.
So internally, we have some customers who they take the RTL and then they introduce additional constructs into the RTL, which then get placed in when you do your place and route with these dummy cells, and those dummy cells actually have no connections to them, but they have metal, typically at the highest layer, so that you, depending on your metal stack choice, that puts identification information in there. However, that makes it a little bit more complex for doing for DFT, your scan chain insertion, and all that kind of stuff. But companies have developed those internal systems where they inject those extra constructs into the RTL. So there are other ways, like with the Accelera's IP tagging approach as well, where they add extra metadata in to avoid having to do that insertion into the net list. So I think that's an area of interest for a lot of people, not just you. It's a common thing, and I think we're trying to drive that through the Accelera IP tagging initiative.
Next question.
With all this local copy of your workspaces now with being multi-giga, workspaces, do you care about backup, or do you even, do you take backup, or you just follow the policy check-in, or you don't have it? Everyone, thinks that's the best thing, but not every designer do that.
If it's not checked in, it doesn't exist. I mean, that's our attitude at NVIDIA. Now, we have rarely, until a year ago, I would have said we've never lost any storage. We had an event where we lost one volume in the over 11 years that I've been there. But in general, our attitude is we tell our designers, look, if you don't check it in, it doesn't exist. So check it in, right? I mean, we have so many petabytes of storage on our engineering farm, we can't afford to back them up. So we don't. And since the vast majority of the stuff that we care about, really what I mean is everything that we care about needs to be checked in, we just tell them to check it in.
Second question was,
Do you
talked
back up
about
everything that's checked in?
Yeah, I mean, obviously.
Yes.
I mean, it's not only backed up to tape, it's snap copied off site, it's in other data centers. Yeah, I mean, it's many copies of it around the world. So yes, it's totally backed up.